morning. Not quite made it into the afternoon yet. Good morning and welcome to this, the first of the Chartered Institute of Internal Auditors Talk to Internal Audit Facebook sessions. I'm Liz Sandwith and I am the Institute's Chief Professional Practice Advisor, which means that I'm responsible for technical guidance that the Institute produces. I do presentations like this, and I write articles in magazines, etc. That's who I am. Chartered, for those of you that perhaps don't know, the Chartered Institute of Internal Auditors is the only professional body dedicated exclusively to training, supporting and representing internal auditors in the UK and Ireland. And we have approximately 10,000 members across all sectors. So that's the introduction. Hope you got your coffee. I've got mine. And let's start today's session. So as you will all be aware, COVID-19 has impacted our lives in ways that we couldn't even begin to imagine. And for some organisations, issues such as pandemic were absolutely on their corporate risk registers, for others not. Others maybe had crisis management on, others perhaps didn't anticipate this at all. So we are now in the position that we're in. We're in lockdown, lots and lots of us are working from home, and that presents challenges as well. So what I want to look at this morning is the provision of the internal audit opinion. And heads of internal audit in some sectors are required to produce and provide an internal audit opinion, a head of internal audit opinion, based on the work that they have undertaken during the course of the year. Others, it's nice to have, but perhaps not mandatory. So what we are going to look at today is those of us that provide it. And just to be a little bit pedantic for a moment, the IIA Standard 2450 talks about provision of an overall opinion around risk, internal control and governance. Those of us that provide it will be very familiar with the provision of the requirement for a head of internal audit opinion. What I've done is I have put a poll out to see how many of you are required to provide a heads of internal audit opinion. It just gives me a bit of a feel for the audience so that we can make sure that we cover those sorts of, the majority of the audience in terms of their obligations. So the opinion is usually provided at the end of the financial year to the audit committee by the head of internal audit. What goes into the opinion? The opinion is based on the work that internal audit has done across the year. So don't forget, at the beginning of the year, internal audit will have created a plan based on the organisation's current risks in terms of achievement of its strategic goals and objectives. And that plan and that programme of work will be then approved by your audit committee. If you don't have an audit committee, it might be approved by your board or your CEO. And then internal audit will start the work needed to deliver that programme of work, those audits, and those audits will feed and inform our opinion at the end of the year. It is good practice, and in a lot of organisations, best practice, to provide an opinion to your audit committee in relation to the remit of internal audit, which is around, as I said, governance, risk management and internal control. So we just need to think about what does that mean. Now, one of the challenges that I know is facing a number of internal auditors at the moment is that because lockdown came before the end of March, which is often the end of a financial year for organisations, some internal auditors were unable to complete their programme of work. And the questions that I've been asked are, therefore, because I have been unable to complete my programme of work, does that mean that in effect I am unable to provide anything but a limited assurance. Absolutely not. Unless that was what your work, the output from your work indicated was the line you should take. What we need to be very clear about is being open and transparent with our audit committee, and ultimately that will go to the board in terms of the work that we have done. So if you have completed, say, 80% of your work during the course of the year of your plan, then you can provide an assurance in relation, an opinion, in relation to that 80% of the work. You will then have to flag, quite rightly, to your audit committee that 20% of the plan was not delivered because of COVID-19, etc. And these are the key risks that internal audit is not able to provide an opinion on. So for 20% of the plan, in effect, what we are saying is we can't provide an opinion. For 80% of the plan, we can provide an opinion, and that opinion will vary depending on the language you use, but you might be talking about substantial assurance, reasonable assurance, limited or no assurance, and that will be based on the work. Don't forget, also any consultancy or advisory work that you have done feeds into this as well. So you can include all of this in your thinking when you get to feeding back to your audit committee. And I would, and always have done, broken it down a little bit. So I've said, based on the audits, the engagements I've done, this is the assurance, the opinion I can provide. Based on the consultancy, advisory work I've done, this is the assurance. And then based on the fact that COVID-19 has interrupted the completion of the internal audit program of work, I can provide no assurance around these topic areas. And then there's a conversation to be had with your audit committee, and they may well say, actually, we are still concerned about some of those high risks. So internal audit, can you make sure that you include that in your program of work for 2021? Absolutely fine, not an issue. And that also then brings me round to thinking about next year. So everything we are seeing, hearing from government at the moment is talking about into May before the lockdown disappears, or at least a phased return to work, whatever that might look like, begins. Now, from an internal audit perspective, that is going to, I feel fairly certain, present some challenges for us. Some of the internal audit functions in some of the sectors, retail, hospitality, leisure, I am aware have been furloughed, along with other staff. It's not that anybody's picking particularly on internal audit, but they've been furloughed because the organisations have closed. And therefore, internal audit is going to have to think about what does that mean. So if you are a furloughed internal auditor and you are looking to return to work at some point, perhaps in May or into June, then what is it you are going to be saying to your audit committee in terms of the work that you are planning to cover during the course of the remainder of the 2020-21 financial year? So we're going to have to think, and we are going to, I would suggest, probably put in the bin or the shredder the plan as it stands at the moment, the plan that perhaps you took to your audit committee in January or February needs to go in the bin. We need to start again. What are the challenges our organisation is facing? Things such as, well, what if you're in manufacturing? I was on a webinar last week, and there was a head of audit there from an organisation that makes condoms. They have moved from manufacturing condoms to manufacturing plastic gloves for the health service. And therefore, one of the things that we are, as internal audit, going to have to look at perhaps is what were the risks that presented? How quickly can we get out of that and move back to our core manufacturing? And also think about what does that mean from an internal audit perspective? So we need to factor all of these things into our thinking. There will be new risks. Lots of organisations, you will have seen it all over the press, have had a significant hit in terms of revenue streams. I have begun to sense that 10%, maybe even slightly more than that, of organisations may never reopen after the COVID-19. So that's going to have an impact as well on internal audit. And we, as internal auditors, need to think about recognise probably that maybe some of our jobs will be impacted as a result of the return to work process. Some organisations, and this is where I am a little concerned, some of our organisations who have furloughed internal audit will now be thinking, actually, do we need internal audit? So, bearing that in mind, I think we as internal audit need to be able to present almost at day one when we go back into the office, or even slightly sooner if you wish, through email and virtual forums, a program of work looking forward. So how can we help our organisation in perhaps key areas? So cost reduction. Is there anything that we can look at from an internal audit perspective that would look at the risks around our costs? And can we come up with any potential solutions that would help us mitigate cost? What are the challenges facing the organisation moving forward? And what are the priorities of the market sector we find ourselves in? And how do we deal with those in the new world? Because I think we all have to face up to it. The world in which we operated back in March, beginning of, probably won't be the world that we see when we go back in late May, June, whenever that is. The ability to do things virtually has impacted everybody's lives. Technology's been crucial to us. So things like using data analytics, perhaps working remotely, all of these are new challenges for us. Being able to talk to your audit committee through a virtual forum. Who knew that? I'm chair of an audit committee, and I had a conversation with the CEO recently who wanted to cancel audit committee. I said, no, not from good governance, inappropriate. Therefore, we did a virtual audit committee. It worked. I wasn't able to read the room quite as well to sense who was getting a little bit fed up as you can in real life when you're face to face. But we met our governance obligations, and that is really key to us. So we need to factor all of this into our thinking as we move forward. So key thing, a plan. What are we going to put in that plan? What are the key risks? How can we help and work with our organisation to survive moving forward? Build a plan probably based on maybe 9 months rather than 12. Make sure we are identifying the really key risks, because I would also suggest that potentially the organisation's goals and objectives for this year have also changed significantly. Therefore, the risk will have changed. What are we looking at for key risks? And think about how that's going to impact on your opinion that you give at the end of 2021. So a year from now, when you're taking your opinion to your audit committee, what are you going to be saying? So rather than wait then to have a conversation with them about we haven't covered this and we haven't covered that, excuse me, it makes better sense to agree that up front. So one of the key messages I have been talking a lot about is the importance of making sure you're talking to your audit committee. Be that virtually, be that over the phone, your chair of your audit committee is so important to you as we go through this period, this pandemic, this exceptional period in our lives. So we need to think about that. Talk to your audit committee. Have your plan. talk about what are the revised objectives of the organization, talk about the key risks, talk about what you're going to do. Also, remember I talked about earlier cost reduction. So if we as internal audit can demonstrate how we reduce costs, perhaps we don't have to be on trains commuting across the UK and Ireland, flying here and there. Maybe we can use virtual moving forward. We know it works. Then let's do that and let's think about what we need to do moving forward. So for me, the key takeaways from today are make sure you've got a really strong plan in place that will ensure that you can deliver the added value that I know internal audit can bring to organizations, particularly in exceptionally difficult times. Think outside the box. Think about what you can do that perhaps you've not thought of doing before. Great example of this, again, on the webinar I was on last week, internal audit, head of internal audit, brought his team together and said, stop the plan. Let's think about the challenges facing the organization. What are the risks? And let's see if we can come up with some solutions to help them. And they identified that one of their customers in a particular country was a notoriously slow payer in terms of payment for goods provided. So they then extrapolated out COVID-19 and said, well, they were poor payers before, they're going to be even worse payers now because of the impact of COVID. So let's stop selling to that customer. Let's sell to customers in areas, in countries, in locations who are very prompt payers. That brings our revenue in, which will help mitigate the risk of loss of revenue in the short term. We can go back to the other customers, but immediately, maybe we need to think the priority is about revenue. So doing things like that, thinking slightly outside the box, thinking about what we can bring to ensure the future success and the sustainability of your organization moving forward is going to be fundamental. The other point, and I make no apology for repeating myself, is absolutely talk to your audit committee. If you are not at the moment, as a head of internal audit, having regular conversations with the chair of your audit committee, I think there's something amiss. You need to be talking maybe even weekly with them. And hopefully, if you're an internal audit function or an internal auditor who has been furloughed, hopefully those decisions were made in conjunction with your audit committee. If not, then that's a thing to think about as we move forward. Why did the audit committee think this was an appropriate course of action as proposed by the business? And should they have had more of a detailed conversation with you as internal audit? Now, that might reflect your relationship with your audit committee and might be something you need to think about building on as we move forward into the new world, as everyone is calling it, post-COVID-19. Having said that, I don't think the challenges are over by any stretch of the imagination. And I think as we move through the rest of this year, I think there are going to be new challenges. So some sort of brainstorming in the internal audit team around risks facing your organization. What are they likely to be? What are the challenges? All things that we need to make sure we build into our thinking. So that's basically what I wanted to talk about today in relation to the Heads of Internal Audit annual opinion. I am more than happy, as you know, to take any questions from any of you. I think you all have my email address. If not, it's on our website, so you can readily capture it. I would beseech, beg, I'm not getting down on my knees, I'm too old to do that, but I would beg you to have a look at our COVID-19 site. We've got lots of technical guidance on there. We're also running a weekly Heads of Internal Audit virtual forum. We've got the notes from that on there. Lots and lots of information for you to access to perhaps help you through the challenges that you are facing. Because I think it's absolutely fair to say there's no one size fits all at the moment. So I can't say this is exactly what you must do, because that's not how it works. I think we also have to look at things like our IPPF International Professional Practices Framework. If you're not an internal auditor, welcome. But if you're not an internal auditor, that's what it means. And remember, it is principles-based, not rules-based. So look at it and apply it as a principle rather than a rule, and recognize that some elements of it you will struggle with in the current climate. Question that came out yesterday was, my EQA was due in May. It's not going to happen. Therefore, will I be rebuked and held to account because we haven't had it within the 5 years? Not if you've spoken to your audit committee. Talk to them, make sure that they're on board and they understand why. Schedule it as soon as you can. You know, if we are changing the laws that allows you to drive for 6 months in a car that doesn't have an MOT, I feel absolutely certain that we can be tolerant in relation to our external quality assessment, because it's only part of the whole standards framework. So those are my thoughts for today. What I also want to say to you is, remember that you can access this live stream through the Institute's Facebook page. So if you have colleagues, friends, parents, children who you think should be listening about internal audit, then now is the time to get them to access this and understand the joy of the profession, even in challenging times. You can also follow us on social media, and we're on LinkedIn and Twitter. And who imagined a woman of my time of life talking about Twitter and Facebook? But changing worlds, I said this. And it will detail Institute's events, new streams, all of those sorts of things. I also will hope you join me next week. Bring your coffee and we'll have a cup of coffee and a chat. Next week, we're going to talk about real-time active assurance, something different, looking at some of the things that internal audit is being asked to do now rather than straightforward auditing. So I've got some great examples of that I hope that you will join me to hear about. I put a poll up, and interesting to see that about 45% of the people on the call were required to provide an opinion. The 55% weren't. I think it's good practice, so I think it's something you should always think about doing. And I'm slightly disappointed in an audit committee that's not asking for that from internal audit. So maybe that's an opportunity as well to share thoughts with them as we move forward. What else? Oh, yes. I have a little, I don't know whether we call it a quote or a message that I wanted to share with you. Talk to internal audit, because the Institute is listening. And what comes out of this from your questions and from feedback that we will get could be new technical guidance, another session like this on a different subject. I'm hoping that these are things that will form part of your calendars moving forward. So thank you ever so much for joining me. I hope you found it useful. And don't forget, same time next week. Thank you. Bye.